In today's PC world, it seems no matter where you turn, someone has been offended by someone saying something. What can you say in today's world? What is the right thing to say, and how do you approach a situation where someone has been offended?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to a Pondering Life episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. Today, Steve Sandor and I discuss the PC Pendulum. Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Good, mate. Hang on 2 seconds. How are you?
Very well on this bright, semi-bright morning. And you?
Yeah, good. Just let me. I've had to move out of my office for a couple of days.
Yeah.
My son's up from Canberra.
Need somewhere to sleep.
He needs somewhere to sleep. Yeah. So I'm in the lounge room.
So it gets a bit like that. I'm in the same situation in my house. We've had friends staying and I've lost my green room. I have a recording room, which I could painted the wall green so I can do green screen stuff as well.
Right.
And it actually has some bunks and people are sleeping there right at the moment. So, which has been used for the past couple of weeks has been used. So I had to get all my recordings out of the way that I wanted to do green screen wise. Yeah. This weekend I might be able to switch it back, but we'll see.
How was your Christmas?
Yeah, Christmas was really good. We had a great, relaxing time. Had some good time with family. It was really, really enjoyable. And yourself, what did you?
Very much the same. It was reasonably low key, although we did have a big night on Christmas, so it was a lot of fun. Yeah, we had a lot of laughs and too much fun to be had at my age, but anyway.
Is there such a thing? I think it's like we kind of want to be promoting, isn't it?
Yeah,
there seems to be a bit too much political and tension and stuff like that for us.
It wasn't so much that, it was waking up in the morning.
Yeah, well, I don't experience that so much anymore because I don't drink anymore. So I don't have that. Although I do remember what that was like.
Yeah,
I don't think it had anything to do with age.
And it was a very late night too. So sort of a combination of both. So anyway.
Yeah, I remember as when younger, some experiences going to bed, quite late, quite drunk, waking up the next morning. It was the several glasses of water before going to bed made a difference.
Huge,
if I recall.
yeah, and that requires you to find the water.
Exactly. I was because I was doing some research in one of the projects that I'm working on. There's a travel show that we're working on, and when I was looking at we're looking at signs and that led to signs for what the signs are, like a bush in front of a pub was required. It was actually mandated to have that.
Oh, really?
Back in 1300s, and even before that, the Romans had required that as a symbol of this is a place of trade, but part of the reason too was in England in the 1300s, it was mandated. I think it was King George. No, it wasn't someone the second anyway. King Richard the second, I think it was, but it was so that the inspectors could come and check the ale that was good quality, so they'd know where to go to check the ale. But because the reason is that the water at that time was actually not very good, would actually make you ill. So that's why ale was the supplement.
Right.
But they also needed to know where to go and check and make sure that it was actually good ale. So that's a bit of what
they couldn't drink water, but they could drink beer.
That was exactly it. The beer was safer than water. So
there you go.
Which maybe probably led to a lot of conflict that happened back then. But
yeah.
But that's touching on some of our topic to talk about today, the PC pendulum, as to what is appropriate to do and say, which
I'm a little. I know I suggested we have this conversation, but I am a little nervous about it. One, because
isn't everybody nervous to say anything?
Well, isn't that ironic? Right, and this is my point. Is that I don't know, I haven't kept up with the laws, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know I know what's not offensive, right? I know when I'm not being offensive, right?
Yeah.
And I know when I am being offensive.
Yeah.
But I don't know when I'm not being intentionally offensive against the law because I'm not up with it. I choose not to follow the news. I choose not to follow, social media posts, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So, I'm just hoping that we don't get sued by some government agency.
I think we're probably more asking questions than we are stating this is the way. Yeah, and we're not. I mean, certainly not. When we step in the realms of equality and that kind of thing, I mean, we're certainly not treading anywhere there because both of us are. I think we both believe in equality and equal rights, and people have that right to do that. So, I think we're pretty safe.
Yeah, but isn't it funny how my natural tendency was to be concerned or fearful of the consequences.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's an unintended consequence of this whole debate around political correctness, where people just start to become a little fearful of acting in a way. And so what do? So anyway, so what are your thoughts?
Well, what you're mentioning there certainly is a tool to control people. That can be done because fear is a powerful motivator, and it's been used. There's great series on Netflix. I don't watch a lot of TV, but there was one about how to be a dictator, and it goes through some of the very key dictators: Stalin, Hitler, the
Caesars. Did it go back as far as the Romans?
No, it doesn't go
more contemporary.
Back. It's more contemporary. Colonel Gaddafi,
right?
Syrian, the guy in Iraq. What's his name? Saddam Hussein.
Yep.
It's funny how we forget those people so quickly, isn't it? It's just they're not part of our life anymore.
Well, I think that again, that's age as opposed to cognitive.
Looking forward,
cognitive impairment.
Yeah. But it was one of those things. Was fear was a massive control mechanism used, and it's really important to be mindful of that. So, from my perspective, it's something. Is being, certainly not allowing fear to control anything. I don't. If it's a fear that's pops up, I quickly push that to the side and focused on what is right. Which I think if we, stick to those higher principles, we're usually pretty safe. And that's part of why on the part of the share.care wrote the code, which is basically a modern version of the Knights Code, and gender neutral as well. And it's not. And the first one is the first code is to like yourself and not be offended at the opinion of others. Because, and I guess that comes from my perspective of being a big student of Wayne Dyer. And his philosophy was that your emotions are yours. So someone can't offend you. You can be offended by what someone says, but someone can't offend you. And so, and certainly from my perspective, I'm not going to say I haven't intentionally offended people, because it can, as I said, fear can be a powerful motivator and part of negotiation. If someone has a weakness, and you can exploit that. And I've certainly done that in excuse me, in several different ways, to get an outcome. But the proviso with that was the outcome was always a good intention for both parties. Sometimes people just need a little bit of pushing to go to where is a sensible solution. And so I've always been of that opinion that position that it's I can't offend somebody. Someone can be offended by what I say, and then if they are offended, I can address that if need be. Doesn't mean I have to. Doesn't mean I do, because some people just can be. It's not unknown for some people to be irrational at times, and
irrational or emotive towards a particular position that they're holding, whether that's a real or perceived.
It was an interesting
position.
Yeah, it was an example I'd like to put with that is I was watching a documentary on a comedian, and he was talking about the comedy, and there was a blind person in one of the things that he was doing, and he not in a mean way, but he included the blind person, because the blind person was sitting up the front, and he included the blind person in the show that he was doing.
Yep.
And everyone had a laugh, and he had a couple of people after the show have a go at him, saying, "How dare you? That's offensive." So people that didn't even know this blind person, they come up and they were offended for the blind person, and the blind person actually had come up to him after the show and goes, "I really appreciate that, because you included me."
Inclusiveness,
normally, yeah. So it's interesting what people can get offended about. I mean, if someone offends you, if you are offended by what someone does to you, then address it, definitely. But if you're getting offended for other people, I think that's a bit, especially when it's not someone you know or have anything to do with.
And context is everything, isn't it? I mean, that's the funny thing about, it's a comedy show, and comedy. And this is a real tricky one, isn't it? Because of the whole cancer culture that's running around at the moment, and comedians are being, I don't know, troubled by what they can and can't say in an environment, and so it's like they say something, and it's like it's funny, right? It's like it really is funny. It may well be offensive, right? But it's funny. And this is the tricky line between, am I being offensive to be offensive, or am I being offensive for effect? To elicit an emotion, right? And when a comedian is eliciting emotion, they're looking for laughter. Right, or some form of engagement by the audience that will then bring that tension up to that moment where they say something. You think they're going to say something, and then they say something completely different, which is then funny. Right? And so you know what the. Unless you've just walked into a random room somewhere, right?
With your eyes closed.
You go to that event knowing full well what that comedian's history is, right? Typically. And yet you get offended by that. Well, if you don't want to get run over by a car, don't walk in front of a car. It's like,
and close your eyes and walk on the road.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing about the whole, the political correctness is that we talked about the balance of it.
Yeah.
The need for an alternative view of a particular position that is currently acceptable, to moving it to something that is fair and reasonable. And to be able to get to that position, you actually have to put a force against the current situation and push it as hard as you possibly can to the center. And because it has that momentum, it goes to the other side. And, and that we end up with this oscillation of progress. And we're looking for some balance there. I was listening to a podcast the other day. It's funny how serendipitous things and the
reticular activating system.
It is, isn't it? So there was this podcast.
Everyone's got the same car as me. I didn't see it before.
And it was on. I think it was Patagonia. Might have been the podcast, and they were talking about this woman was doing some research on the ecology, right, and how farmers would plant, monocrops. And there was one particular study that she worked on where they had planted all of these trees. So the farmers had cleared the ground, planted the trees, and then all these weeds and things started to grow up underneath the plants. And then so the farmers sort of cleared all of that area. They did a study where they left some of the plants that were growing under it, and they took away the others.
Right.
And the plants, and because the plants that were left behind interacted with the trees that were there and provided them with nutrients and and sustenance, if that's what trees get, I'm not sure. And it was that cooperation and collaboration between the two, opposing what you would look from the surface. You would go, these are two opposing forces, and when you take one away, you lose the balance. And so the remaining, when they took the weeds away, the remaining trees suffered because it didn't have that balance. So I wonder whether we're just missing that context of we need to understand the other person's viewpoint, right? If you want to be called a he, she, they, them, what, I don't care, right? I want to respect that, but you also have to understand that I'm a 67-year-old white male privileged individual who has lived their life with certain norms in society, and I'm not a bad person, but I have certain views. I'm not discriminating against you, but you also need to understand that I have, my rights to do that. So there's this complexity amongst all of this, and I just think we need to simplify it and just be a good person. That would be a good start, right?
Well, there is that. I mean, take care of yourself first. Take care of your own garden. I think that's in the Bible, and so many people have quoted that, and probably was even who was it just recently was quite popular. Was it Jordan Peterson?
Oh yeah,
I know he's because he in his book, is it something about? I've only scanned the book. Making your bed first, or something like that.
Oh no, I'm reading it now. It's the 12
rules for life.
12 rules of life.
It's one of the chapters is about taking care of your home or cleaning your room or something like that. Which is if you can't, and from a principle, that there's a lot of people who I think it's important to make sure that you can look after yourself first and take care of yourself before thinking you can solve the world's problems. I mean, I've dealt with that a lot as an employee, with people coming in and going, they're going to solve all the problems, but they can't even do their own job properly yet.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't work that way. You need to have that foundation. And I think there's a lot of that in that space where people have a little bit of knowledge. And I've been guilty of that too, in areas where I've got a little bit of knowledge and thought, I know everything, and going, I'm going to do that. And then I've been smart enough to be around smarter people that have guided me, and they went, oh, hang on a minute, I need to step back a little bit here, because I don't have all the knowledge that I thought. I've got some strategy, but the finer detail, there's a lot more there. There's a lot of learning that goes into that, and I think that's where some people do step too far with a very little bit of knowledge and thinking that they understand, and this is the situation.
And where does the knowledge that they get come from? What's the source of that knowledge that they form an opinion on? Unless they're unless they're studying the subject, right, and going to source documents, and reading research papers, and listening to multiple versions of the same argument, to be able to collect balance, right?
And that's where that little bit of knowledge comes in.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous, especially if you've been reading research papers, because a lot of people will actually read the summary of a research paper but not read the whole paper, and in particular how the study was done. Because it's interesting, I haven't read it, but there's actually a research paper. Also, I said I haven't read it, but I've been told by several different people that have read it. There's a research paper that shows that playing basketball makes you taller. But it's a legitimate research paper. But when you look at how the study was done, so on the summary, there's logical argument as to there's taller people, blah blah blah. But when you actually go through and look at how the actual study was done, when you go to that level of detail, you go, well, that just doesn't stack up, because how the research was actually undertaken is flawed. And there's a lot of that research out there. The good papers will start with, this is what we found. However, we need to do more research. And then when you look at how they did the research, you can see why, because it's quite limited in, even though they might have got a large sample, how they've got the sample is quite limited. And there's so many other variables and factors that needed to be considered. But you say people.
I mean, you and I could write a research paper, right? we could call it a research paper, do the research, and as you say, it'd be flawed, based on flawed fundamentals. But unless it's been peer reviewed by multiple people and published in as an authoritative. Excuse me, as an authoritative piece of work with substance. It's just opinions then, isn't it?
Well, even that, because and I'm not going to get into which area, but there's a number of, like, a lot of research papers that I've read in a specific area that's highly political at the moment. And I've read the research behind it. I've actually read the questionnaires, which is like 600 pages.
Right.
So I've read through the questions that were asked, and what the paper says, and what the paper says we still need to do, yet that's not what's being put forward. It's one very, very narrow aspect of it, and saying this is what was found and this is what's happening. And that's the political agenda behind that. And so, and even what they project, they aren't using the full sentence that was in the paper. It's like this little part here as that the basis for what is a large political movement at the moment, which is interesting that these are really educated people, and it's because so I think it's really, it can be challenging especially when you're up against that, but it's quite, I consider it quite authoritarian, where if you say something, which is there's countries in the world, if you say something, well, Russia's a good example. Speak about Russia because they're the pariah at the moment of the world. And but if you said something in Russia that wasn't in line, you get arrested. And we need to, I think, in this PC environment too, we need to be careful. And that's where, I mean, I'm not saying I agree with everything Jordan Peterson says, but the point that he made, which gave him the notoriety that he has, was that I'm not against calling you whatever you want to be called. If you ask me to that, what I'm against is being compelled that I must, that it's a law that I have to speak a certain way. And that completely flies in the face of free speech. That's not, that you are mandated to speak a certain way. That's different from not being saying you shouldn't say something because it's offensive. So that was a really big step across the line from what the government was doing. And that's where, when we had, like you mentioned about this fear, we need to be able to be able to speak our opinion and have the discussion, saying, hey, like we're doing now, and we need to do that. And yes, I think we need to face that fear. I put it in context when I think about it, if I'm going to say something like that and what the consequences may be, which is often, I don't think it's often that I would even step across that line, in the sense of being something that's going to get me in legal trouble. But I think of Nelson Mandela. How many years in jail? 26 years in jail he spent and eventually resulted in. I mean, he did some things that weren't very good either. Before that, he was apparently, I don't know. I mean, there's different versions of history, but he apparently did blow some stuff up, which is probably not the best way of achieving things. But different times too. I mean, how many years ago was that? But he went on to do what he did in South Africa, which was a lot of good. But he spent 26 years in jail to get there. I think I put it in that context and go, well, how come if it's something that I really truly believe is the right thing to do, then there's certain crosses I'm willing to bear. But part of it too is listening to. I think if it's an individual, generally, if someone is offended by something that I say, which I can't recall anyone being offended by what I've said. I mean, I'm not including some internet trolls in there, which I wouldn't know of because I rarely read comments anyway. But so I can't think of it. But if someone was and come and said to me, that I was offended by that, I'd have the discussion. So, well, tell me about that. What offended you? What?
And I think that's where it breaks down. I think there's both the offer to enter into a conversation, because as you said, you don't comment on the troll comments, right? Because there is that fear that if you enter into that, it's the keyboard warriors, they're beautiful, got lots and lots of opinions, but they say things online that they wouldn't say to your face, right? Or wouldn't have the courage to say to your face. But because they can hide behind either anonymity or whatever, they're not going to get cancelled, and nor do we want them to get cancelled, right? You want to be able to say, there's this. You want to allow people to say whatever it is that they want to say, but in return, you need to be, you want to say what you want to say. And so if you do that in a hostile environment where you're not listening to the other person, the only reason you're speaking is to get your opinion across. And I don't really care what your opinion is, because I'm not interested. I've made up my mind that I'm right and you're wrong. Okay. Then you're never going to end up with understanding, not agreeing with, but understanding the other person.
Yeah.
Right. And so therefore you will always be at loggerheads with each other.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of, and I've heard, again, I don't do a lot of reading, but I listen to a lot of things. And there are, people that have had situations where they've put, Jews and Arabs and blacks and whites and yellows and all sorts of different people together, gays, straights, and they've put them in a single environment where they've had to communicate with each other, right, and uncomfortably, 3 weeks in a somewhere where they just can't leave. And these are not people being forced into these situations. It was like this is the situation, and they're voluntarily there, and they can voluntarily leave if they choose to get, if it becomes too uncomfortable. But at the end of that exercise, what the bias and the call it, whether it's bigotry or a particular view against a particular type
prejudice.
of person, a prejudice. Yeah, thank you. That has diminished. The principle hasn't gone away. That they believe, like for example, if you're a Christian and you're a devout Christian, you don't believe in gay marriage, right? Because that's what your doctrine says, right?
Yeah.
But if you're a gay, you don't believe a gay atheist. You don't believe in God,
yeah,
right? And you believe that it's okay to love somebody and care for that individual person, and that's okay. That's your doctrine, right?
Yeah.
And both are right. They're just the way you want to live, right? It doesn't mean it's right. And this is the thing. It's like it can be. They both can be right. We won't know until we die, will we? Right? And we know one of us is right.
Yeah.
Right? One of us will either.
One of us will know. The other one, or we'll either both know or we won't know because we'll just be dead.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, but in the meantime, what we're doing is we're having this horrible time.
Yeah.
Of being human, right? And just angry. And this is if we could all get into a room. Well, if you could get into a room with someone who you had a different opinion with, and you were able to speak with them passionately, to forcefully put your, not forcefully in an aggressive way, but forcefully in a passionate way of your opinion, to educate and for that person to understand your viewpoint, not for you to convince them to change, right? It's just for them to understand your viewpoint. Then, okay, I understand your viewpoint. And it's interesting, at what point you may actually change your opinion because the argument that is put forward maybe is compelling, and you go, oh, I didn't see it that way. I didn't look at it that way. I didn't have that view, so I'm looking at the mountain, not the sea. I'm standing in the same spot, just 180 degrees difference, right? Yeah. So I wonder whether and the thing I like about Jordan, I've got this with Jordan Peterson. It's funny because I actually love a lot of the things that he says because he challenges the logical, right? Yeah. he's very logical, and he goes, people go, do you want equality? What, equality for everything?
Well, yeah, he talks about quality of opportunity and quality of outcome too.
That's it, yeah. So the equality of outcomes, no, that's really bad. And I'm not educated in this space. The only thing I'm educated in is how I want, what I know is how I feel when when they act in a particular way. Yeah. And I do struggle with people can't make you feel anything. Well, I did, right? I felt it. Yeah. It's the meaning that I give that feeling. Yeah. Is I think the key is like, well, okay, well, I can brush it off with a duck's back, water off a duck's back. I don't really care. I don't give it any importance. If the person who is giving me that having that conversation with me. If there is someone who I care about or I have a lot of respect for, I think it has more meaning for me, right? So if one of my kids talks to me in a particular way, or one of my friends, that has a lot, that hurts more, because I know I know it's not like them to speak like that to me. So it's like, what's going on here? What's the meaning behind this conversation that is causing you to be, what have I done to cause you to be like that, right? So sort of coming back to this, well, what can I do about this situation? So, I don't know. Are we going around in circles with this?
Well, I mean, it's a big topic, and it's interesting what you mentioned there, because, I mean, what you were talking about, whether you can get along as well. It wasn't Simon Sinek. There was another one. I was someone like that I was listening to, and he was talking because
Adam
he's Jewish, and he anyway, it doesn't matter who it was. The point of what he was saying was, you mentioned about gay marriage, and he's Jewish and believes very strongly in the Jewish religion, which is against that. But he said, look, I've got lots of friends who are gay, and we have great friendships. From the perspective of, I won't attend a gay marriage because of my religious belief, but that does not affect my relationship with these people, as a respect for them as people, as my friends. There's just certain things that I wouldn't do because it's against my religion, and they also respect that as well. So they respect that the religion part, he believes in I don't know. Whatever that the parts of that religion are, that doesn't allow that. So he was saying, but I've got lots and lots of great friends that are gay, and that's not a problem. I'm okay with that. Whatever they want to do is whatever they want to do. But there's certain parts of that don't fit with what I believe, so I just don't participate in that. And that's I think when you look at it, well, that's a choice. I mean, I don't, participate in, pagan rituals, as harmless as they might be. It's just
they're
not
brilliant,
something.
mate. I did one on New Year's Eve. They're brilliant, right?
But that's the thing.
Joking.
Yeah, no, but you did mention that. It's like, I go to, it's, take as an example, my friends and I will catch up and play poker. And my son comes along for that as well. Now, I don't drink. And there's a couple other guys there that don't drink. No one's there is offended that we're not drinking while everyone else is drinking. And I'm not offended.
Vice versa.
Correct. And it's so, and we just, and it actually, it was interesting that it didn't even come up. And there was a couple of guys that weren't drinking. I didn't even notice they weren't drinking until they pointed to me and said, "Oh, I noticed you're not drinking." I didn't even notice. I wasn't paying attention to that. I was too busy focused on the poker game and,
not losing.
And yet, exactly, I'm very competitive. So that was the comment was, don't let Damien get a little bit chipped up. You're going to be in trouble. Because I just, don't like losing. But yeah, it's, when you put in that context, it's when looking at that difference and going, are we offended by that someone is different from us, that they have a different opinion? Well, we're allowed to have an opinion. If you're using that to repress that, and that's where it's different. I don't like the term. I like to use the term oppression, in the sense of, if someone's oppressing someone else, that's wrong. I don't like oppression in any form. And one of, you mentioned about, two people with differences. One of my friend works in the space of troubled youth, and we're talking gang fights here and stuff like that. And with one of the schools, he deals with young kids, teenagers and adults as well. And he helps them not be that way. And in this school, there was these two gangs. And what he did, they were like, it was getting really bad. And so what he did is he told the principal, send the leader of this gang to the room, to a room, and he told the vice principal to send the leader of the other gang to another, or to a room. They were the same room. So they both walk into this room at this time and they're looking at each other. And he said, no, you're staying. And they talk through things. And what it was all these differences that they had. They found they actually had a lot more similarities. And as it turned out, about a couple of months later, I think it was the father or the mother of the of one of the gang members died. And the first person to the door to offer assistance was the gang leader of the other gang.
Something right.
Which never would have happened unless they had those conversations. And that's where we come to, with that. Is it when we look at, is someone being offensive? Like, my intention is never to offend anyone, to do something offensive. Well, except as I mentioned before, sometimes in negotiation, I cross, I'm pushing buttons sometimes to get an emotional response. But and certainly when you're in a legal space, for people that have been there with barristers and cross examination, it's you definitely want to control and allow someone to go a little bit nuts when they're on the other side of it.
Again, that's context, isn't it? Because that's an adversarial position. You've walked into the courtroom. You're expecting, or a negotiation room. So you're expecting a particular behaviour. Anyway, whether offensive behaviour is acceptable behaviour in that situation, or you're just pushing, as you say, and getting a tactical advantage. So you push someone's buttons to get them emotive, so that they start to lose control of that situation, which puts you at an advantage.
Yeah, definitely. Right? And it's very subtle. It's like, there's a couple of papers that I've read on it, some good QCs that talk about how to control a witness. And it's, again, you the quote, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah, closer. Yeah.
So it's like you're being really subtle about it, and drawing this person as a friend into this position, and then all of a sudden, bang. And then they start to lose it. And it's like, it's really, but outside of that, it's like, if someone does something that I don't, there's a certain behavior I don't like, I'll just raise it with the person, say, hey, look, I don't think that's appropriate in this situation. And also too, I think we do need to be a little bit sensitive. Maybe I take it a little bit too far. So a lot of the things that I write, and even sometimes when I'm putting a quote in something, if it's a gendered quote, I'll make it gender neutral. So I'll change someone's quote.
They.
Yeah.
Instead of
exactly.
him or her to they. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and a lot of things I write from that perspective, I make, as much as I'm aware of it, I pick it up and I write gender neutral. I try and speak gender neutral, that kind of thing. I noticed it at a lunch I was at yesterday.
So the reason behind that, I'm really interested to know, is that because you want to be inclusive or you don't want to be offensive?
I understand the principle of, when they talk about, like, if you're in that space of gender equality, and saying, the example, you're playing like a girl. What does that mean? And
there's actually a business called You Play Like a Girl.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah, it's in Melbourne. and what they do is they take young women and teach them life skills. Play like a girl, right? So they're actually using it's brilliant.
Yeah, okay, I have to check that out. Yeah. But it's, from my perspective, it's, I think, I guess I get that from my mum as well, because she was very much, men and women are different. And we are. Biologically, we're different. There's very, very big differences in our physiology. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the same abilities, in the sense of what we can achieve in life. I look at Mary Barra, what she's done at GM. Amazing. And you look at any I mean, the head of the EU's, what she does. So there's amazing talents, and that's where, and I know in my own negotiation course, Negotiation Magic, one of the principles we teach is negotiation from a lot of what would be called female traits, empathy. I mean, women have a much bigger empathy, and so to do it in a demeaning way, to say, oh, you're not good enough because you're playing like a girl, that I think is wrong. Because it's that is to say that this person is not as yes, the skills are different stereotypically, but that doesn't mean they're lesser. And that was something I grew up with, which I'm very grateful from my mum for. That was, men and women are different. You need to recognize they're different. I had that when I was playing as a kid. My mum would always say, hey, be aware. I had a sister who was a year younger. He said, you are physically stronger than her. What you think would be normal and okay for you could hurt her in your play. So you just need to be careful in how you play. And so I had that awareness growing up. And so that's where, from my perspective, it's keeping that mindset of, because reticular activating system, if you shut it off, you'll miss those opportunities. So for me, the reason I do that is so that I'm open to what all the potentials are, which is what I really believe we should encourage people to be well, they certainly should have the opportunity to fulfill their fullest potential if that's what they want to do. So that's why, from my perspective, I just want to make sure my thinking always remains open, that there's whatever the potential is there, I'm open to seeing it.
Yeah, and I think it's like there's a couple of things that are sort of popping through my mind is what awareness is one, right? So the fact that you're aware of the circumstance and the context that you're in, and so am I using? How can I use the circumstance or situation around me to my advantage and to advance the experience of the people who I'm having that with, right? So if it's in a negotiation, it's an adversarial, right? Yeah. So could be. It could. It doesn't. Best piece of advice. Yeah, exactly. But best piece of advice I got from an old boss. He was a solicitor, but he ran a investment fund. He said, "You always leave a little bit of salt on the bread, Steve." Right? So always leave a little bit of salt on the bread. And what does that mean? It means that you always leave a little bit left, a little bit in the deal for the other person to benefit from.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's otherwise they're going to be disadvantaged, and then you have then you do actually have an adversary. But it's that awareness of the situation, and then the consciousness or the understanding that you that you want to create a situation that gives the other person the ability to be right as well. Right? So allow them to be right.
Yeah.
Because then it takes, when they're right and they know that, that you understand that they're right from their perspective, it sort of takes the pressure away from it, right? And just thinking, how can we behave differently? So what are we trying to do here? What we're trying to do is we're trying to unpack a really, really complex situation, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully the listener is getting some value from the conversation that we're having, right? It's not just two blokes talking on a 7 o'clock on a Tuesday morning or Wednesday morning, whatever the day is, right?
Yeah, it's still early in the year.
So care. So be aware of your circumstances. Be aware of the situation that you find yourself in. Listen. Be curious about what the other person has got to say and the context in which they grew up. So, you grew up with a sister, I grew up with a younger brother. We played rough.
Yeah.
Right. We wrestled.
Yeah.
Right? And I was the older brother. So,
So you were sitting on his head farting, right?
Yeah. until until I wasn't the biggest, right? Or he became stronger, right?
Yeah.
Or was more clever about how he could do things, right? So we grew up with that, and then as I said, so awareness, curiosity, and then behaving in a particular way that this is now we're getting back into a little bit into the Bible, but treat people the way that you would want to be treated.
Well, there's a lot in that statement,
isn't there?
Yeah,
isn't there? It's like, and again, it's like the conversation that you have with yourself. Treat yourself with
100%,
respect.
100%. That's really important.
Yeah. So.
But it's interesting what you're mentioning too, is and putting that in context as to what is going on, because as you were talking about, it's having that conversation, and sometimes you can't have that conversation, largely because of the circumstance it's in. And it was interesting. Is that I'm going to reference TV as much as I don't watch a lot of TV. They do reference some things there, but I was watching Cobra Kai, which is the Karate Kid story.
Mm-hmm.
Karate Kid was a movie like as a kid. I think a lot of people did. A lot of people did. That was it was quite popular, obviously. And then they had an interview with the I think this was after the third season or something. They did there was a show where they were having an interview with the cast and crew from the show, or the cast, I should say. And the character Johnny that's played, I can't remember the actor's name that plays that, but they said because they were a bit concerned about it initially, whether he's out, because he's just so not PC and just doing everything that's not PC. And he said it was so much fun to play was the point it was making. But the other thing that was interesting was what they referenced was they said we forget sometimes that when you're in LA, that's not the real world. That and that's not how the bulk of people behave. And sometimes we need to put it in context as well. I certainly do when I see someone might be on social media or even on the news or something that's jumping up and down about something, that a reflection of what the majority of people speaking it, or is that someone in a position where they can make a lot of noise and is using that for a political purpose? And and then I really pay attention to what other people are saying in relation to that aren't in that space, and try and get a better feel for, is this really something that's a major issue, or is it someone, again, the squeaky, which oil gets the wheel? The squeaky wheel gets the oil, or in some, I'll rephrase that to the squawky person gets attention. And so I try and look at it and go, well, when I see something like that, is it something that's one? Because also too, when you're looking at, we forget that news platforms are a business, and the way to generate income is to have eyeballs there. And how do you get eyeballs there? We'll do something controversial. That's why, it wasn't Paris Hilton did a sex tape. She wasn't in the news, and it's like, well, people are going to go, oh, something, and it's and you go, well, what is that? That's is it really that controversial, or is it tapping into a few people? The first follow-up principle, where it's tapping into a few people that are going to get emotive about it to create a bit of buzz to create that attention, or is this really something that is systemic and deeper, that does need attention? And that requires a bit of thinking, which we're in our busy days, not everyone has the time to think about it. They just react.
I'm listening to a book called it's the story of Genghis Khan.
Yeah.
And it's we all know of him. Well, you may know of him as someone, who ruled the
Yeah, we've ruled a lot of Asia.
well,
A lot of us probably have some sort of DNA connection to him because
yeah,
of his
exactly.
proclivity to.
In his peak, he had control over the space of Western Europe at the moment, as in physical size, and went from Mongolia all the way through to the Stans, Uzbekistan and all those sort of thing, and down as far as Turkey.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was the lineage, the Mongolians, the steppe area.
Yeah.
It was it all had lineage, right? So you were a Khan and you were in this particular group and that group. And then what they did was that they would, on a seasonal basis, they would support, one Khan would support the others and attack the third one. And then 2 and 3 would attack the first one. And each year or a couple of years, they would sort of, try and get control.
Yeah.
And there were Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, a real disparate group of beliefs as well that sat behind a lot of these tribes. And to cut a long story short, what he did was he when normally what would happen is that you would go and rape and pillage, right? Yeah. So you would win a battle, and then you would take everything that was there, the horses, the belongings, the women, right? Yeah. So you would collect the women, and then let the men, the youngest men were the ones who jumped on the fittest horses and ran away, and the older men sort of stayed behind, and the women and children, they would just sacrifice them and just let them go. And then they would come back and, regroup and fight again, right? Yeah. And so what he did was when he won a battle, he didn't then automatically rape and pillage. Now, this took, this he didn't all of a sudden think of this overnight. This was a lifetime of experience of where he was abandoned. His mother was betrothed to a young man. She got stolen by. And she gave herself up so her husband could live, right? And all that's a fascinating story. Yeah. But what he basically did was he then brought everybody together at the end of that, and eventually what he did was he would include the people who he had been who he'd overtaken, right? Yeah. He would include them in the spoils. So anyone who accepted him as the leader, as the victor, he would support them. Anyone who didn't, he'd kill them, right? Yeah. And he basically went through this period where he would. And they call it the white bone and the black bone of Mongolian. So the white bones were the lineage; they were the people who came from the purest of lineage, and he was a sort of like a mongrel. So that's why they call the black bone. So he wasn't the pure lineage. And what he did was he would chop the head off, right? So he would progressively get rid of the white boned leaders until there was only the black bone leaders, right? Okay, left, which and then but what he did, really interesting thing, was he then created platoons, so 10 men, and it wasn't that you were related to Genghis Khan that got control of that. It was your ability. Yeah. Right? So if you were able. Right. But the interesting thing, my point that I'm trying to make here, is that what he did was he brought all of these people together, and he put people together who were different. Yeah. So he put Christians with Muslims, with Buddhists, right, and forced them to be together, to a band of brothers. Yeah. All right. And so that and there was one particular moment where he he called a meeting together, and not everybody turned up, which means that they didn't support him. And the test was whether these band of brothers would stay together and be bonded, or whether they would all disappear and go back to their original roots, right? And
Yeah.
because he had been inclusive and
Mm.
had combined everybody together and collaborated,
Yeah.
that those people stuck by the system, right? Because they could see that the other system was not working, and that's how he then maintained control, right? And then so for, I mean, obviously when he died, they're a different lineage, but that whole the egalitarian,
Mm.
right? It would. I don't know whether it started with Genghis Khan or whether it was sort of, went back to the Romans or the Greeks or whatever. But this was the fact. This was fascinating that, again, sort of just bringing that back, the awareness of the situation, being curious, he brought in a lots of counsel, right? So he knew certain things, but there were, like, he grew up riding horses and firing arrows, hunting. He wasn't a farmer, but the environment that he went into was a farmer. So, he collaborated with one of his blood brothers.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating story. But I think the reason I'm raising it is that when when you have an opinion and you're in the suburbs of, inner West Sydney or outer West Sydney, or
Mm.
you're in Queensland country, or Midwest of America, or a particular area, and you've never traveled, you've never read, you've never. And that's by choice. That's not a
Yeah.
judgment. It's just, that's what you've done. You're really
Mm.
happy with where you are, or or there is no circumstance for you to. You just don't know any different, right?
Yeah.
So you've formed a whole bunch of views around that echo chamber.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to understand, is that, like, again, we're a white privileged male. I've traveled all over the world, and live in a very beautiful country, in
Yeah.
lovely part of the country as well. I'm well read. I've got lots of privilege here. I think when you're in that situation, or when you're in a situation, that you actually take the time to consider what the other person's circumstances and context is, so that you can not agree with them, but you can empathize with them.
That's what you've said there, I think, is really powerful, in that context of understanding the other side. And I think, because similar to you, I've been in, traveled to over 40 countries, met lots and lots of people. And more so, I continue to meet lots of people, and like yourself, we just, but we that point of listening, as you said, people, I know from my perspective, certainly when I had a much narrower view, is because I grew up in a small country town. We had what we had, and that was it. That was the opinion that we had. And I certainly noticed that, like, when I talk with my parents, for example, a lot of their views, because they've never really been anywhere. So they've never really experienced anything else. And it's hard to have a fully informed opinion if you're not listening to what the other side has said, which is really interesting, because what you mentioned about Genghis Khan, but there's this, I mean, that goes further back from the psychology of being able to survive. There's some studies, I can't remember what they are at the moment off the top of my head, but in principle, what it was if you didn't get along with the people in your group, you were by yourself, which meant that you had more risk of not surviving. So it was we learnt at a fundamental level to get along with other people in our group so that we could survive.
Which means that you're going to, if it means you're going to adopt what's the norm and acceptable behavior there. Otherwise, you're going to be seen as being different and potentially ostracized.
Yeah.
right? And that's the peer group pressure. It's okay to, slag at women, or it's okay to steal, or it's okay to drive
Mm.
fast, cars, or it's okay to be a decent person and acceptable,
Yeah.
to turn up on time and not to talk trash to other people and all the rest of it. It's just the ecosystem that you're in
Yeah.
that forms those opinions.
Well, that was part of the basis too. One of the business I have is a coffee brand called Sexy Moxie, but the values underneath are diversity, strength, and hope. And the reason that is there is because it comes from this need to, um, from my experience, I've learnt a lot. And so I've been fortunate enough to have a mother that opened the doors to allowing things me to experience what other people have to offer, and from that I've grown and become stronger. I've learned more because I'm listening to what these people are saying, what their different opinions are, and so from that I'm able to take that on board and be able to actually grow, and not only just grow but also listen. And again, when I was traveling, or when I travel, I notice everywhere I go, people are fundamentally, if we look at the fundamentals of who we are, we're fundamentally the same. We all want to enjoy life. We want to good things for our children. We want to have fun with our friends. I don't know anyone I've never met anyone that doesn't want that, and they're pretty fundamental things in my mind. So we've got these things in common. And then we have some differences. One of my business partners from Iran, him and his family, they left Iran, and but listening to him talk about the Persian culture and experiencing the Persian culture and things that have happened there, it's like, so that's more knowledge that I've got available to me, to be able to grow and then use to help achieve the things that I want to achieve. It makes my life easier by taking on this knowledge, which is what the purpose of Sexy Moxie was. Coffee houses originally were a place back in the 1600s in Turkey where people met, discussed, they discussed economics, they just discussed art. And so the whole point was to communicate and learn from each other. And that's where I think when we're talking about this PC world of, is someone genuinely offended, or is it a political thing? And also too, is it like you say, the circumstance? If someone's offended, goes to a comedy show and then is offended by what's in the comedy show, it's like, well, maybe don't go. I remember in marketing, when I was learning about marketing, it was like using comedy in marketing is not a great idea because firstly, half the people won't get the joke. So it's like, it's not a good global thing to do. But yeah, that's why I just wonder on the PC side of things whether we need to take a breath and go, hang on a minute, do I because I know, like, from my perspective, again, being a student of Wayne Dyer, whereas he's very much, your inner emotions are your emotions, and how you choose to react is generally something that whether you're aware of it or not, you've learnt to do. Because if it was the circumstance, we would all react exactly the same, and people don't. So it's not the circumstance; it's how our beliefs are set up, and or how we allow our beliefs to set up would be more the correct way to do that. That then filters what we see and how we react. So,
I mean, taking a breath. I'm not sure that, and I don't have the answer, right? So I'm talking. My mouth is ahead of my brain in in this moment, because again, the whole point. My thinking was that at each point where we've had a need or a progression forward. So, the suffragettes, back in the 1900s and the 1920s in England, if they took a breath and didn't do what they did, women would still not have the vote. right?
Yeah.
If the First Nations people didn't do what they did in the 70s, I don't know, do we call them Aboriginals, First Nation, Indigenous people? So this is the thing: is like, when we grew up, they were Aboriginals, right?
Yeah.
I'm showing respect now because First Nation people is the preferred, what is it, nomenclature? For the first,
Yeah.
description. First Nations is what they would like to be known as. Okay, great. Well, I respect that.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll call them First Nations. If it wasn't for the First Nations peoples doing what they did in the 70s and 80s with Gough Whitlam and all the rest of it, right?
Mm.
That they would still be they're still oppressed, but they would even be worse off than they are now, right? So if they took a breath, there'd be no progress. So I don't know. I think it needs activism.
100%. I mean, when I was saying take a breath, what you're saying there, is it a good example? From my perspective, and probably because I don't watch the news and it's not an area that I paid attention to, I'm going to use me as an example here. I did not know that their preference was First Nation people.
I'm assuming that's it, right?
Yeah. Also, I don't know. And what I'm saying is, from that perspective, if I called someone an Aboriginal, and they got offended and then started attacking me, what I'm saying is, using that as an example, to take a breath and say, hey, did you know? Because that's how I would approach it.
Yes.
If someone, and so, because I have the point that it's my offense. And so, okay, how am I going to deal with that? And so if something does something that I think is inappropriate, so I'm going to use the word inappropriate. If it's an inappropriate behavior to me, I'm going to say, hang on a minute. I'm not going to attack the person and say, how dare you? They might not know. And so then it's the case of, okay, did you know this is that circumstance? And I've done that in the gender equality space, where I deal with people where they'll say something like, oh, you're playing like a girl. I said, did you know that it's not like, how dare you say that? That's offensive. Did you? And I think that's what we're having this conversation for. It's not that we have the answer to solve all the world's problems. We don't, but this is a way, because as you say, people don't know what to do. That's the problem. And inaction is not good. So it's like, what do we do? Well, in that situation, let's have the discussion. It's like, if someone does something to you where you get offended, then attacking the person back, or I shouldn't say back, attacking the person, because they're probably not, in most cases. I'd say I believe most people are generally good people, and it's not their intention. And I certainly know some older people that use language which is not. Certainly, that they are really inclusive, but the language they use is just something that they've done, and it's not intended to be offensive in any way. But that's just the perception of how that language is used now.
Yep.
So, but having that discussion with them, they go, "Oh, I didn't realize that." Because I've had those discussions with some older people and said, hey, are you aware this can have this effect?
Yep.
And they're going, and also too, it gets the people to listen, because again, as soon as if you're at anybody's attack, what do? You immediately defend. So you're not going to
attack back.
Yeah. And that's, I think, because I made that note as you were talking, that part of what we're doing is trying to find a way forward to actually go, well, what do we do? Which is, having the discussion or asking the question. So you're offended. What specifically, or can you tell me about that so I can understand that more?
And I think, sorry, I see, again, I didn't give the context enough gravitas when you sort of said, take a deep breath, or take a breath. I think that it's that pause of reacting straight away to a situation.
Yeah.
So rather than reacting straight away and then jumping into that emotive response, is actually pause.
Yeah.
So if we all paused before we reacted and gave it that, 2 or 3 seconds to gather one's thoughts around, how you respond. Now, what happens, really interesting thing is what happens is that when there is a pause, people want to fill it, right?
Yeah, silence is
So
golden. I love, and that's one of most in my negotiation magic. Silence is it's one of the most powerful things.
silence is a killer,
Yeah.
right? So it's awkward, it's powerful. Sometimes
I train
people,
myself to be silent. I just deliberately, how long can I be silent for?
yeah, exactly. So again, I do something similar in the leadership programs that I run. It's more around. It's not in the negotiation space. It's like having a conversation with somebody. So if you're continually, asking someone questions or putting opinions forward, and there are different opinions, and there are barrage of thoughts and conversations. It doesn't give that person enough. So that person might be thinking, right, and they just need time to process the question itself.
Yeah.
And then you ask another one.
Yeah.
They're halfway through processing, and now they've got now they've got something else that they need to process. So silence is a beautiful tool to one, in negotiations. What are they? What does the lawyer say? Don't speak, right? Because as soon as you start answering questions,
anything you say can will be used against you.
It's on the record, so don't speak, right?
Yep.
Unless you've got someone there who can help you navigate your way through the system. But let's assume we're not in that situation. Take the time to pause and think of your response, right? And if someone is critical of you, again, if you go to that first principle of that, you believe that everybody has the right intention, right? Now, I don't think everybody believes that, right?
I think people generally have good intentions. Yeah.
Yes.
They might be misguided in how they go about
unless
it.
Unless they're a psychopath, right?
Yeah.
Right? Unless they've got some sort of psychological, something. But that the 80 to 90% of people are genuinely, good, and let's hope that we only hang around with those sorts of people. So take some time to consider your response, or if someone is so, asking a question. So if someone says, that's offensive. So rather than saying, what do you mean that's offensive? You can ask, oh, really? Tell me more. How, please explain to me, not how is that offensive, you idiot, but, oh, really? How is that offensive? Because I'd like to understand how that is offensive, so that I can change my behavior so that it is not offensive, because I don't want to be offensive, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's just a funny story. When Deb and I, when we were married, we were involved in some sort of multi-level marketing thing.
Yeah.
And we were at someone's. I
think everybody has at some point in their life.
we were doing a product demonstration, right? And this is how stupid I can be sometimes. So we've got some hand cream and we were demonstrating cosmetics. It wasn't a cosmetics company, but they had cosmetics, right? Yeah. And it was like shaving cream and all that sort of stuff. And the shaving cream was sensational. You just needed a tiny little bit, and it would foam up, and it would be brilliant. And I'm sitting there, and this couple, they were of Middle Eastern, Lebanese, or some sort of somewhere in that from it. And I've put out the foam, and I said, look how lather it is. And I looked down at the legs, and I said, and it'd be perfect for shaving your legs. Deb looked at me, and she was just flabbergasted, right? And I've realized what I've said, that it was, it wasn't Well, I wasn't being offensive. I didn't mean to be offensive. I was just, my brain was not working, functioning because of the
Yeah.
pressure of the situation that I was in. So, sometimes we can be offensive unintentionally.
Yeah, and that's one of the things to do. Like you're dealing with at the moment, you're laughing at it. And I think we need to do that too, is again take that pressure, open the pressure valve and let some of that off.
Mm.
We're human beings. Sometimes we're going to just make a mistake. And that doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you want to oppress people or you've got and that's, I think, from that perspective, like you're doing at the moment, and because I've done similar things, where it's you go, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that, and then in the moment addressed it or addressed it later, if it needed to be addressed, and have that discussion as well. It's like, and that's
Oh
the whole
yeah,
point of growth.
it was addressed on the way home. I can tell you now.
But I mean, the question is too:
I'm doing the demonstration.
was the lady offended by that? I mean, I'm guessing you didn't know.
I don't know. We didn't hang around for very much longer.
It might not have even said anything.
I can't remember what. I just know that it wasn't intended to be offensive. I could see how it could offend.
Well, you
Right?
don't know that it was offensive to her. It was offensive to your wife, but not to...
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, they didn't join. So maybe maybe the shaving cream wasn't as
there's
important
probably a
to
lot
them.
of reasons I wouldn't go there. But
Yeah,
but it's again having that light.
We take ourselves far too seriously at times.
Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, because I really believe if we have the thought process, certainly I do. That's why again I'm yet to meet someone, and I've had, even there's a couple of lawyers that I think of that I've gone against in some of the work that I've done that were quite horrible in their behavior. Now I don't know what they're like outside of their law environment, so I can distinguish between that behavior in that environment, because, and you mentioned about environment before, it's very contextual. Their job was to destroy me, or destroy the case, I should say, and my arguments, and they were pretty rough about it. Now I could get offended at that, but I didn't, and I could even, you know, not like that person. Well, I don't know that I don't like that person. I don't like their style. I certainly don't like their style, and I don't think it was the best way of doing it. But it's, who am I to say what's right and wrong in that context?
Well, it was probably effective because the majority of people who would have gone up against them wouldn't have had the control that you did. Right, they would, that's what they're trying. We sort of coming full circle.
They're very successful, so I'm guessing they've.
Yeah. Because they're very successful because they know how to push buttons, right? And they get an emotion from somebody who then you then get out of control. Then you say things that you don't mean to say, or it can be interpreted in a way. And that's the gotcha moment.
Yeah, correct.
Right? So stop talking.
It is so hard to teach people that to stop talking. In a lot of circumstances, it's better. How many people have said it and don't do it? It's like we got two ears and one mouth, and people just don't do it. And it's again this whole.
I'm guilty. I'm guilty of it as well, right? It's you get into that situation because you're wanting to be seen to be of some importance. Right, so you're bringing that you're trying to be valuable, right? So I'm bringing it back to management because that's what I do. I'm a management consultant. So the leadership programs that I run, we talk about, someone comes to you with a problem, right? It's their problem, not your problem. As soon as you then start to talk about how to solve the problem, all of a sudden it becomes your problem. Right? Because now you have the solution. You've given them the solution to be able to solve the problem. When it doesn't work, it's your problem because it didn't work. It was your suggestion.
Yeah.
So don't answer the question. Get them to answer the question. How do you do that? You do that by asking questions,
Mm.
right? And then you finally find out at some point in time that they actually don't know what they're meant to be doing, right? And then you have to get into that skills development or capacity, or they don't have the time to do it, all this sort of thing, right? And that requires patience and intention, right? To be it is your job to make sure that that person has the necessary skills. So if we take it into the PC, if everybody then goes, it's my job to actually understand what that person's position is.
Yeah.
So asking questions, explain that to me. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't. I'm an agnostic, right? I'm not a Christian. I grew up in a Catholic family.
Yeah.
I stopped. My parents said you have to go to church, and you get the choice at 15 whether you want to go or don't want to go, right?
Yeah.
And I made the choice at 15 because Monsignor Flanagan, who was this Irish Monsignor, right? And I'm that old that we mass was said in Latin.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then I'm going, I have no idea what he's talking about. And then he'd get up on the pulpit and he'd talk and he'd this broad Irish accent. And I have no idea what he was talking about. I couldn't understand a word that this guy was saying. Seriously, it was so broad. And I said, I was an altar boy for one day, right?
Yeah.
I was so bad at he sacked me. I just didn't care. Anyway, so someone said, "Oh, it's good that we're not doing mass in Latin anymore." And I said, "What?" I couldn't tell the difference between the two. Anyway, so I believe I'm spiritual. I believe that there is a God, right? And that God happens to live within me. I can, and I'm respectful of Christians. I'm respectful of the Muslim faith, of the, the Buddhist faith. Of if you want to, I'm not sure how paganism works, but I can't imagine that worshipping a goat is going to be anything. But obviously, there's some value in there. If you're an atheist, you're an atheist. I'm an agnostic. But I think it's having the understanding or asking, being curious about, what is behind your faith. I don't want you to convince me to be a Christian, right? Because I've made that decision, right? Yeah. Maybe I'll find something in Christianity or in the Muslim faith that will have a spark in me. But if I'm only ever going to be, I've made my decision, I'm contradicting myself here, right? So if all I've ever done is made that decision that that's how I'm going to live my life and don't allow other opportunities to come, right? Well, then I'm in that then I'm in that echo chamber, and I'm never going to be able to do that. So I feel as though I'm curious enough about a lot of things, right? To be able to, for these things to be able to influence the way that I am and how I care. I just hope that other people get that opportunity, right? Because a lot of people get into that situation, and the circumstance that those people are probably not going to be listening to this podcast, right? No. So again, we are in an echo chamber. So the people who are listening to this are interested, hopefully, in broadening their views and having different viewpoints. But if if you go back into that sort of Midwest or, stereotypical area where there is only one view of the world, these people are not going to have the opportunity of seeing a different perspective. And so therefore, when that situation arises where they have to choose sides, they're going to stay in that ecosystem. Yeah. I was listening to a podcast on it was on cryptocurrency, but the story was of they call them the in the Second World War, English children, anyone over the age of 7,
Yeah, I think I
They had to,
mm,
they put them on trains and they
yeah,
sent them, away to the countryside.
yeah,
And what ended up this young brothers, they ended up in somewhere down in Devon,
mm,
you know, and one of the and these were Welsh people as well, so they migrated out of Wales to Devon, back in the 1900s, so they were settled there. And the Americans, when they entered the war, there was this one company of Black Americans. So the only blacks in this, the Negroes were
yeah,
in this company, and they've all been billeted out at this at this city in Devon somewhere.
yeah,
No one had ever seen a black person ever,
yeah.
right? And
Wow.
so so that whole community then got to learn
Mm,
about Cajun food and
yeah,
all that sort of stuff, and it opened their eyes
yeah,
to that possibility. So I think it's incumbent upon us to try and create situations where people can see respectfully different perspectives,
yeah.
and for us not to be offended when they don't, that bias, when they haven't had that opportunity for us to be
Mm.
disrespectful of that.
That's a good point that you raised about not having that opportunity. Because again, I look at my parents, and again, they've had limited opportunity because they really haven't gone anywhere. They lived in effectively the same country, well, definitely the same country area, pretty much all their life. There's a little period where we lived in Melbourne for a year when my parents split up, but after that, we've lived effectively in the same town. In that same area, which is an area of small country towns. And so the viewpoint is limited to that and any media that they might be watching, which, media is, again, it's a business. It's not, certain channels are going to have certain opinions because that's what is their market that they're aiming for is people with similar opinions. And having that ability, which is why I started, the Sexy Moxie coffee brand, because everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people like coffee, and it was originally a hub for getting for people connecting and having this discussion. So
It's experiential, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
So if we can have, we, like you're saying, if we can reach people and have those discussions, because sometimes too, I mean, the other area I wanted to talk about in relation to that was, sometimes we overgeneralize as well. You have this noisy cog going on about this is how the whole world sees things, which is why I found that interesting when I mentioned about the Cobra Kai thing, where they actually said, well, the view of what LA's got as to what's offensive for this Johnny character is not the world's view. It's just this we're overly sensitive here was what they were saying.
And they have a medium that makes it feel as though it's the worldview.
Correct. Yeah. And so sometimes because I've made those notes when we're talking about, is it this one view that everybody has, or is it, an overgeneralization? But the other thing I think we need to come back to, or wondering if we come back to, is what is it we're trying to achieve by that? So when someone is saying I'm offended by that, are they just, venting, or are they trying to achieve something? Because that comes back to this whole listening thing. Because I know if someone does something that I think is inappropriate, I will raise it in a way that hopefully will elicit a different response in the future, or elicit some education that might enlighten, which again, you're not going to get if you attack someone, because they're immediately going to defend or attack back, as we discussed before. So I do wonder, when people jump up and down and go, I'm offended by that, have they thought through what is it they're trying to achieve by making that comment?
Yeah, I think there's lots of nuances in that,
Mm.
So if someone said something and you weren't sure if they were being offensive or not, I think you could take um, one view of that or one approach, and that might be to explain to them, that that's offensive. So this is where then they've made a statement. Like when I when I was growing up, we used to say, "Oh, that's gay," right, which meant that it was, not cool. Not cool to do that sort of stuff. And there's no way in the world that one it's gone out of the lexicon. So, but just now it has a different meaning, right? So don't use that expression anymore. And I use that expression only to demonstrate that
No, but it's a good example that you raised, because I mean, when I was a kid, we had the same thing. I didn't know what that was, other than it was just as
not happy.
And it's like, because the only other context I had was the ice cream, which was a gay time.
You're right.
It wasn't. To say that's gay, it wasn't. I didn't know what a homosexual was when I was younger. In primary school, I didn't know what it was. To say that's gay was just, that was something stupid.
I gotta tell you this story. This is hilarious. So one of the kids called me a poofter at school, right? It's like, you never hear that word anymore, right? But and I had no idea, and I go, no, not a poofter. I have no idea what a poofter was, right? So I come home and I said to Mum, what's a poofter? And she goes, oh, and my brother is 10 years older than me. And so I was like 9 or 10 at the stage, and he's an 18, 19, 20-year-old. And she goes, oh, Paul will tell you. So Paul starts to demonstrate. Puts me in, stands behind me, puts me, and Mum goes, stop. And I'm just looking around because, I had no idea what it was, right? And that's that ignorance that you have, and it's explaining to that person then the context. But if someone's offensive, right?
I just want to touch on that before we move on to that, because the similar sort of thing happened to me, but it wasn't poofter, it was poof.
Right.
But again, to me, because I asked Sam to ask, but a poof was like a big round,
a pillow,
like a big beanbag.
Yeah.
And so that's right, because I said, Mum, what's a poof? And she said, oh, this is, you've got two there. There's a black one and a white one, which again, I don't know if that's, when I think about it now in today's PC, where we had a black and a white poof sitting together.
Like, so we can like, just in this conversation, how many people could we have offended?
Well,
right. It's like,
how many people could we have enlightened too?
It's like, exactly.
We're talking about this. We go, well, okay, we learnt. Okay. That's and like you say, poof is not used today. Gay. That's gay is not. Well, some people probably do use it, but it's not. We wouldn't use it. I wouldn't use it.
But not using it to be offensive, right? It was just like saying, it's like we used to say things, but instead of saying they're cool, we would say gas.
Yeah.
Right.
Or someone does something stupid, you're a dickhead.
Well, that's universal, right? So
But it's the intention was always that. It wasn't to degrade somebody. Certainly from my perspective, when I was growing up, it was never to degrade anybody. It was to highlight. It was the same as saying you're a dickhead or you're a stupid. As the banter that we did.
But I think that's where it gets, and I think this is where it sort of become that balance, is that it was never intended to be offensive until it was. Until there was a power struggle. Right. So somewhere in the playground, someone wanted to get above you, to be bullying you. Right. So how would they do that? They wouldn't do that by being nice. They would do that by being offensive, and they would use whatever tools and mechanisms they had at that time to to overcome you, right, and to suppress you, make you feel bad because you were different, right? And I think that's where it becomes the difficulty is when we're all the same, when we all look vanilla, right? It's really easy to, okay, we can be understanding, but as soon as you throw, chocolate and strawberry and caramel into the ice cream, right? Yeah. It starts to taste differently. And some of it we like the taste and some of it we don't like the taste. And so if we don't like the taste, we don't want the chocolate ice cream in that bowl, right? So what do? We start to, push it away. We don't want you in that. But the experience, so I'm struggling with the analogy now, right? I've got to the end of the bowl.
I was thinking, I was having flashbacks to when, because we had the Neapolitan ice cream at my grandmother's house.
Yeah.
And it was like, I always tried to, mix it so that I could get anything other than chocolate. But always when you mix it together, you always got chocolate. It's like, no matter how much of the other stuff you put in.
And so for me, I would have everything but the vanilla, right? Yeah. So the vanilla was I chocolate, strawberry, vanilla in that order, right? Yeah. But it's that whole being open to the other person's viewpoint. Control forces the hand, I think. So when you want to be controlling, I think one strategy is to be offensive, right? And if that doesn't work, maybe threats and fear and a whole bunch of things. It's a bit like the solicitors or the barristers that you were talking about, right? Yeah. What do they want to do? They want to control the situation. Yeah. So how do they control the situation? By being rude. Yeah. By being aggressive, by being offensive, by eliciting in you a response that gives them control of the negotiations, but you didn't give them that, right? Yeah.
Because, and there's a certain level of sophistication in how that's done, that you can do it in a way which then is not deemed to be offensive.
Yeah, but when it's primal,
it certainly elicits so when someone reads it, it's like, oh, they're never going to get charged for that. Yeah. If you were to take it that far, but I don't think. I mean, to pursue it legally is. If anyone understands the legal process, it's just when you understand what evidence is and things like that, you're not going to go down that path because it's unlikely to succeed. But I think that the point that we're getting to, or one of the things we're really unpacking here, is this whole, especially when we come back to what we were talking about before, about when we mentioned about gays and poofters, so using of that term, not the person. So just to clarify for those listening, I'm talking about the words gay and poofter. We used it in a context which was not, certainly not intended to be demeaning against anybody. It was amongst our friends where we're going, hey, you're a dickhead, which we still, maybe someday in the future that might become offensive.
I don't know about that. I think it was a circumstance. When I grew up as a 20-year-old, homophobia was massive. Yeah. Right. And I'm not aware of
it wasn't something I was aware of.
Yeah. I'm not aware of anyone who I went to school with who was a closet, right? But they certainly, if they were, there was no chance, absolutely no chance that they would come out, right? Because the circumstances at that stage, because they would be derided as a poofter. Yeah. Right. So I think when we understood what it was, I think we used it in a derogatory term, not to call someone out as being gay, but we used it as a derogatory term with someone who we wanted to offend, right? Because homophobia was massive. Yeah. Right. And I think nowadays is we are enlightened. You used it before, we're educated, and we, and then the opportunity for people of some prominence,
Mm.
announced that they were gay. I keep forgetting his name. The footballer, I think he played for Manly. He came out as whilst he was playing, he came out
Yeah.
as being gay, and and all of the jokes that came out of that, right? So in the
Mm.
scrum and all the rest of it, they were sort of funny, but they weren't. It's like, okay, not really sure that I'm into that, right? And then I think today now it's like, no, okay, if that's your if that's where your you know preferences are, that's okay. I understand on the other side of it, it's like, well,
Mm.
do we want to educate kids on how to be homosexual in school? Right? It's like, okay, now we have this dilemma. We want to educate them, we want to give them, and we want to understand them, but we don't want
Yeah.
to influence them so that all of a sudden they think that, like at 12 you don't know what you are, right? It's like I'm at 67, I'm still working it out, right? So it's and this is where it becomes a minefield, right?
That's a
Is
good
that
point, because when I put it in context from my perspective, because I think I was sheltered a bit from that kind of stuff. Because you're right, there was certainly this very much. I didn't see it as a kid because I think I was very much sheltered from it from my parents. And said when I asked what a poofter was, not a poof, what a poof was,
it's a pillow,
it was a pillow.
beanbag?
Um, and but also too, my parents, especially my mum, were very inclusive of everybody. So we had this attitude of, and that's what, like, from a very early age, I've had friends who have been gay, or are gay, which I had some friends that swap. And this was even at late teenager years. So we're going back over 30 years for me now. And for me, it was like when they told me that, and had some people and this is the point that you're getting to, that they confided in me, that, this is how they felt feeling. And so obviously they felt free enough to talk to me about it, but obviously not in society, I'm guessing.
Mm.
Well, maybe I don't know that they didn't talk about it with other people, but they weren't openly gay. So yeah, it's an interesting point that you talk about from that perspective, that it was, in a way, was a derogatory term, and hopefully the people, some people listening to that are understanding, this, why it was a derogatory term as we're going through this process. That that's maybe why that is an offensive term. Well, not maybe, it is why it's an offensive term to use now, because we realize that was being done, even though yeah. So that's an interesting point to raise, and I'm highlighting it in the context that we've done, because we used it innocently. Well, we thought we were using it innocently, but really there was a deeper thing that we, certainly as a child, I wasn't aware of, as to, and that can then influence. For me, it didn't, because I was lucky to have, the parents that I did, that had more open view of inclusion. So it's very lucky from that perspective, but not everyone has that, and hopefully this, will open that discussion for those people.
Yeah, and the pendulum. I'm not I don't know French history all that well, but I sort of have a feeling that around the 1700s, mid 1700s, 1800s, that there was a lot of homosexuality, around how the effeminate men, the frills that they wore, the makeup that they wore. There were smoke houses where men would be dressed up as women, and the hierarchies, the well-to-dos would frequent those places, and it was acceptable. Right? It was acceptable behavior. And there's the pendulum, right? So it was acceptable, and then all of a sudden it becomes unacceptable, and then it sort of gets over to the the 1900s, or the late 1800s, 1900s, when maybe we've moved away from feudalism into industrialization, and so all of a sudden the the structure of society has forced us into this masculine, feminine thing. So, blokes need to be tough because they're in the mines. I don't know. I'm making this crap up, right? It just makes sense to me that, we end up going through these, we have to go through these pendulum swings for us to experience forward motion, right? So if I didn't grow up in a migrant family, where my parents had grown, and my parents were very wealthy and very well educated in Hungary, right? Second World War, they lost everything. 2 kids, 2 suitcases on a boat, Canada, America, Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, right? And they chose not to teach us Hungarian because my father would go into shops. My father and mother could go into shops. They could speak 4 languages, right? Hungarian, German, Russian, and French, right? But they were learning English. They would walk into a shop and be told by the local shopkeeper, "Why don't you learn effing English, you wog bastard prick," right? So that was offensive. And my dad, right, he would just shake his head, and he made a choice, and it would have killed him not to teach us Hungarian because he didn't want us going to school with an accent.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And if it wasn't for that experience, right? And I'm sure they regret it and they were pilloried by their friends. Like we would go to family functions and we couldn't speak Hungarian and everybody was speaking Hungarian.
Yeah.
Right? And we were the outcasts. So we stopped going to those. And my dad was a very well-respected Csándor in the Hungarian, army. And when he died, all of these mates turned up, and they put the Hungarian flag over his coffin and all the rest of it. It was like he was very well respected. But through that period of time, because of the choices that he made, we just didn't go to those functions, right? Yeah. Because it was embarrassing for the kids that we couldn't speak that. But if it wasn't for that experience growing up, and I was just in that echo chamber of only the migrant and not the Australian family. I used to love going to my mate's place when I was 17, 18. We'd go out for dinner. I'd go over to his place and we'd have meat and 3 veg, right? Yeah. And he hated it.
Yeah.
And I loved it, right? He'd come over to my place and we'd have goulash or spaghetti bolognese and he hated it. And I hated it. And he loved it, right? Yeah. Because it was but it was through that experiences of experiencing other cultures, other positions, other things that it broadened my view of the world and it gave me empathy, right? So when I look at people who were, when I looked at the people coming from Vietnam, when I look at the people coming from, Arab countries now, the migrants who are doing whatever they could to get out of that situation, I have empathy for them. Not that I've experienced it, but I experienced what my parents experienced, right? And I go, and the point is that if you only see it from your point of view, we shouldn't let them into the country because we want to protect the country. Well, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, from a protecting the country point of view, the best economic growth in Australia was when we had the biggest amount of immigration.
Exactly.
It's like that. So that's not really an argument.
We wouldn't be drinking coffee of the quality that you get in Melbourne if it wasn't for Hitler, right?
It's the best quality in the world. Australia has the best coffee houses in the world. It's renowned for that.
Absolutely, now. Yeah.
But anyway. I think
I
what
don't want to
and
take us down that rabbit hole, but I just
of coffee.
well, yeah, no, no, mate,
But
I'm only had my first one yet. I haven't had my second one.
no, I haven't
But
had one yet at all. And it's
oh
like,
man, how'd you
I hit
do
the
that?
snooze too many times before we got up, and it's like I didn't have time to make a coffee. But again, what you really highlighted there was this with your mate. And it's something that for me, sort of, I grew up with a lot was having this inclusiveness of learning from the other, not fearing what the other person has, but having that inclusiveness. And it's like, well, and that understanding of wanting to learn from different cultures. I said I'd love the fact that one of my business partners is Iranian, and there's so much of that Persian culture. It doesn't mean that I wanted it, and I don't have to fear. I know who I am. So there's parts that I may choose to take on, but I'm not forced to take on anything. So I
But
don't
isn't
have.
that the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
Is that like it? You know, you like the chocolate,
Yeah.
but you don't want too much of it, right? And so, I
I
think,
have a problem where I eat too much
yeah,
chocolate.
yeah, yeah. So, but I mean, you know, like there are some there are some parts of culture that you're living in Melbourne, I'm living in Brisbane. There are
Mm.
some parts to living in those.
I'm not offended by that. I understand you're from Brisbane.
you,
That's
you
okay. I
you
won't
are
hold
now
that
being
against you.
offensive, and I'm giving that meaning, right? uh, so so there's so many. If we just accept that, that there are lessons and experiences that you could. I mean, I was thinking when we were talking about when you went, how you grew up in a small sort of
Mm,
village, right? I grew up in the city. There's
mm,
so many things that I could learn
yeah.
by going to a place that only had what was around it,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
and that you had to learn how to live in that environment. Um, how beneficial would that be when you go back to your environment to have a skill that would enable you to be just that little bit better? So in this political correct world that we live in, isn't it? So if you just understand a little bit more about the person who's opposite you, who has a different view and an opinion of the way that they see the world, but if you just allow that to be open
Mm,
and listen to what
yeah.
it is, not take it on,
Yeah.
but listen. There may just well be that little gem there that you could take and adopt it into your world and just make your world a little bit better. Anyway, that's my view of it.
I think you've really got that summed it up there, though, is taking the time to understand what the other person's point of view is. And even if it's, something where we need to grow and learn from that, because we need to have this experience. We don't, if all we experience is the same thing, we're never going to learn anything.
Mm,
And you're certainly not going to learn anything if you're not listening. So I
mm,
think, what you've really said there is encapsulates probably where this PC pendulum is, and you said over time, we it has changed. I mean, and I'd completely forgotten about that, but I loved Blackadder as a kid, and there was that period. One of the series is all about one of those periods where they're dressing up in guys are dressing up in very effeminate clothes. If you want to take it further, if we go back in history, one of my it's a joke that I heard. It's like the Greeks invented sex. It was the Italians that started doing it with women. You know, so when we look at history, you say there has been these swings of what is acceptable and what isn't
mm,
acceptable, and we can take it to a level. From what I understood from what you're saying, we take it a level higher and go, well, actually, what can I learn by listening and learning from what's different around me, um, which is really, I think it's going to help you grow. Which again,
mm,
that was the underlying principles behind the Sexy Moxie coffee brand. Was
mm.
and I'm dying for coffee because you mentioned it.
Yeah.
But it was like diversity, strength, and hope. You learn from things that are outside of your knowledge, and that makes you stronger. And also, if you're looking forward, gives you hope for the future.
Yep. And understanding that you could be wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
That
you just
you
could
can't.
like, the arrogance of I'm right and I
Mm,
know I'm right.
yeah.
Is just it's just beggars belief. Is like, well, you could be really wrong too, right? And
Mm,
I understand that, and this is where that sort of I'm stuck in, I'm committed. I've gone past the point of no return. Now everything that I value is attached to my beliefs. So, I'm not a I'm not a father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter. I'm
yeah.
a title,
Yeah.
right? And that's my value. And so therefore I'm left or right.
Mm,
I'm this or that. And so therefore for me to move that from that position means that I have to accept that I'm wrong. Now my ego gets into it, and it's just stop doing it. Stop being that stop being right all the time or trying to be right all the time, and just accept that you could well be wrong, right? And listen and be open to different points of view, and then validate that that you still believe in that. That's okay, right? But just give the opportunity for to to be wrong,
do you think
because the
that's
world's
something
flat.
to
You realize the world's still flat, don't you?
yes,
I just
but there's people that there's the flat Earth theory. I was reading about that the other day.
yep.
That come up, but it was. What I'm wondering when you're talking about that, is that something to do with liking yourself? I mean, if you truly like yourself, you don't have to feel insecure by what someone else says. It's like you're confident in who you are because you do like yourself. And then you can be open to that because it's not going to affect it's not a threat.
Mm. It probably it's a combination of that being comfortable in your own skin and loving yourself, and so therefore your ego is in check.
Yeah.
In check is probably not the right description, and so therefore you have very little use of control, right?
Yeah.
And so control is power, and so you then start to, if you follow that daisy chain. So if you don't love yourself, the way that um, you counter that is that you try and control the
Yeah.
situation around you. Now, whether you control that, so is power good? If it's used for good, it's
Mm.
good, right? If it's used for evil, it's evil.
Yeah.
Why do we want to control? So why do we want people who are listening to this to change their minds?
Mm.
Or do we want them to change their minds? Or are we just simply just trying to give people our thoughts and views, and then they can, they can either not listen again, right? Or they can come back and listen to another because they thought this exchange was interesting to listen
Mm.
to. What's our objective behind here, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you can. There's so many nuances in this. So again, I think you're right. Is that you're comfortable in your own skin. You love yourself. It's that self talk,
Mm.
and then it flows on from there.
Yeah. So it's because if we're getting defensive. It was interesting because that was something that I learned recently when I was doing some mock cross examinations where I was in the witness box, and it was where I actually found that I was I uncovered that I was actually being defensive when I didn't realize that I was, which was an illuminating thing where I wasn't really listening to what was being said. I was forming a predetermined assessment of what was being said, and then I was responding. So I wasn't even answering the question properly,
Mm,
which was
that's
interesting.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mm.
because it was really enlightening from that perspective of, okay, here it is. I think I know what I'm talking about, but I hadn't even listened to the question, and I
Mm.
was answering questions, and it just like certainly from a witness perspective, it was a fun game to play. It was really illuminating to be put under that pressure and realize, oh wow, I really don't not I'm really not listening. And that's my resolution for this year, is to actually be a better listener, to actually listen more, really listen to what someone's saying, to understand, because as much as I thought I was a really good listener, I wasn't. And it's like, well, okay, I can listen. I don't have to feel threatened by what someone else says. I'm certainly not offended by not offended by what someone says. I'd like to know if someone's upset with something that I've done. I'd like to know more about that. And so so it's all come back to this. I really want to listen to what it is. Doesn't mean that I'm going to take it on board. I'm not. I'm going in my direction, and sometimes we can have different. There's people that I have very different opinions from. We don't talk to each other. That's fine. We don't need to. It's a big world. There's a lot of space for everybody.
Yeah. And I think it's that being curious, interested, not interesting.
Yeah.
And that's that list. If you're listening, we hear it all the time, and I fall into this trap. That you're talking, and I'm already creating the response.
Yeah.
You haven't even finished talking, right?
Yeah.
And I've already come at
do it all the time.
Yeah, and I'm either trying to get my point across, right? I've got your point. Let's not labor that anymore, and let get into my point, right? So, or I'm trying to control the situation.
Yeah,
I'm trying to direct it in a particular way where I think it will serve me better. There's all of that. Whereas if you're listening, and the listening and pause.
Yeah.
So listen, pause, respond.
It's where I don't like debates anymore. I mean, I don't participate in them, because a debate is really, I'm telling you how it is, and I'm not going to listen to you. Is basically I think that sums up debates, because from what I've seen of debates, whereas I love the conversations that we're having, and because I'm listening to what you've got to say. I'm interested in growing from that. It's not a competition. We're both going to benefit out of this, which
Until
is
we
really
speak about Brisbane and Melbourne, and then I don't care, because I'm from Sydney anyway. So I'll be offensive.
We have a border. Why it was closed. We couldn't have that spread there, but yeah, I do fly over from time to time and get up to Cairns and then head off to Port Douglas. So I do like, I technically don't count that as Queensland.
No, that's not. That's another world, that one.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, is that something what we take away from that today? It's like, the PC pendulum is going to swing, and that's okay. And from that, if we listen to what's going on around us, we can actually learn and grow.
For me, yeah, absolutely. It's instead of visualizing it as a pendulum, sort of going backwards and forwards, or sorry, left and right, I see it as sort of more the ability for us to step forward. And like learn from those experiences. So it might be the zigzag of the pathway. Yeah. So we zig this way, we zag that way, but we're going forward. And I think accepting that there will be change, and people hate change, don't they? It's like
there's two things people complain about.
But why?
Change and the way things are.
I don't understand why people. Well, and that's just me. I love change, right? I love tinkering with things. I love making things, different.
It's uncomfortable.
Better.
We don't like to feel uncomfortable.
Yes, yeah. So some people are sort of not stuck in their ways, but they like the way things. Why change it if it isn't broken? All the rest of it. Well, if we didn't change things, we'd still be sitting in a cave, right? Well, maybe that's not a bad thing, right? So again, you can make arguments for
It could be an amoeba in a pond if we didn't change.
Exactly, So, and is that such a bad thing, right? I don't know.
We are where we are now.
We are where we are, right? So, and we're not. It's not as though we're going to stop going because we're humans, right? We are a particular breed of not even a particular breed.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's even just human though, because I mean, if you look at around us, I mean, if you're not evolving, you're dying. That's part of nature. I mean, 99% of all animals that have existed are extinct.
Yep.
That's a lot. And when you think about how many animals that are on the planet, to we go, well, majority of it's extinct.
I was listening to something the other day, and it's like someone was saying, look, the planet's fine, right? It's us that will die. It's like we're trying to say, we're trying to save the planet. No, we're not. We're trying to save ourselves, right? That's what we're trying to do, because the planet will be fine, right? So if it will adapt, it will survive, right? The ecosystem, so it'll end up with the ozone layer will open up, because and what it'll do is it'll kill us, and then because it's killed us, it'll close up again, and it'll be fine. Right. So Earth is going to be fine. It's us. It's us that are going to suffer. And this is, so.
And we've only been here for a very short period of time as far as the planet goes anyway. And then the broader universe, I mean, we're only speculating at how long that's been around.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, that's the subject for the next conversation.
Exactly. All right, we better stop recording this and we can move on. But I think, I mean, I'm really. I think I got a lot out of this, in the sense of, it really is about listening and trying to understand, certainly from a PC point of view, and from my understanding of of really listening to what if someone is offended at something I say, it's like, well, okay, I'd like to understand that a bit more. If you're willing to have that discussion. If you're not willing to have the discussion, then I'd question the legitimacy of your offense or your intention of your offense then. Because it's then, if you're not willing to have that discussion, then what are you really trying to do? You just
and maybe the discussion with you is the 80th time that they've been offended.
Could be.
And for 79, they've just okay, right, I'll just move on. I'll move on. And the one with you was just the one that broke the camel's back. And we don't know. That's the thing. It's not until we stop. I love that. I'm going to listen, pause, respond. So just so if you do say something that you're trying to be offensive, why is it that you're trying to do that? Are you trying to make a point? Are you being offensive to change people's views or give them a different, like, no one, am I offended if someone calls me white privileged old man? I should be.
Yeah.
Shouldn't I? I should be, but I'm not, because that pretty well describes me.
Yeah. Well, and there is that, because there was, I think, now, so I was listening to that on a recording somewhere, podcast or something like that, with saying, it was the white privilege was, but now the white privilege is actually minority. So they're the when in a lot of spaces, I can't remember the examples, I'd have to look that up. But it highlighted that point that, at one point, it was, but actually in a lot of circumstances, that what would be considered the white privilege is actually the minority, and not actually,
or it used to be an advantage and now it's a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We'll leave that at that for today. We'll have some more pondering later on.
Indeed. Always good fun, mate.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.